Welcome to the live question and answer period for the home enteral nutrition session. We have Cynthia Reddick and Lisa Epp joining us, and I think that soon we'll have Katherine Bennett join us as well.
I'm here. I just can't get my video working.
Hi, Katherine.
Hi.
Lisa Epp is joining us from a nice sunny spot there.
I can dream, can't I?
You can. Thank you for wonderful presentations. We learned so much, and I just realized okay. So I'm going to address, we have several questions. Please send in more. We're happy to take as many questions as we can. We have about a half an hour. We'll spend about a half an hour, and we may excuse Lisa Epp early so that she can join a breakout session that she's moderating. Katherine, can we help you in any way?
I just wrote to Andrea, with this computer, I feel like I need the specific Zoom meeting ID link rather than just a direct link. So,
okay, so Andrew's working on that.
Hopefully, yes.
Okay. So we'll start with questions, and even though we can't see you, if we have a question for you, okay, we've got your audio.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Mundi, Lisa, do you want to address Dr. Mundi may or may not be able to join us?
Yes, so he is trying to join right now, but where he has horrible internet reception or internet access. So he's having a hard time getting on. So I'm hoping that I can answer some of his questions, or if not, we might have to follow up with you to get the answer for you.
Lisa, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can.
So,
that's great.
I'm pulled on the side of the road. I think I found a spot for reception.
We have to admire that dedication.
Yes. So Dr. Mundi, just so you know, the participants can hear you now. So I don't know if we maybe want to start with a couple questions for him just in case we lose him.
Okay, I'll start with that.
Yes,
so we have so one question for you, Dr. Mundi. I'll start with that one. You have a question. You mentioned specific groups besides the CDC concerned with managing COVID risk. Do these groups, hi, Katherine, do these groups address the degree of risk from the underlying disease that would affect home enteral nutrition patients? And if so, which groups would give guidance on this?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I think you're talking about which groups would be at risk for developing COVID-19,
and which I think that they're looking for an organization or a department of government maybe that could talk about the degree of risk depending on your underlying disease.
Yeah, I think the department of the government is going to be the CDC. They're the ones that have an entire division that's dedicated to infectious disease. And as you know, Dr. Fauci probably has the most experience out of anyone in the country at kind of managing these sorts. So the CDC would be the one that we would seek guidance from. Then in terms of, risks, we get asked this question a lot. And I've really combed through the literature to try to look at, is there a way we can predict risk factors for home enteral nutrition patients? And in terms of that risk, home enteral nutrition in itself doesn't seem to cause any sort of extra risk. It's typically what are the diseases that led to a consumer needing home enteral nutrition. So as an example, if someone has head and neck cancer and they're going through chemotherapy and they need enteral feeding during that time while they're getting radiation or chemotherapy, then because they're receiving chemotherapy or radiation, they would be at higher risk. Same thing can be said for other diseases that would suppress the immune system. So if you have, are going through chemotherapy, radiation, or have any other disease that suppresses the immune system, we would say you're at higher risk. But I think having said that, it's even individuals that we never thought would get sick, we're seeing in our ICU. So I think everyone should be cautious, wearing masks, social distancing. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
Dr. Mundi, this is a question that Cynthia and I were talking about earlier in the week, is if the stomacite is a point of vulnerability at all. Like you're not supposed to touch your face. Do you have to exercise similar cautions with your stomacite? I mean, I know you would normally anyway, but.
Yeah, it seems that the virus, I haven't seen that in a paper, or even that's not been reported, but it seems that this virus does sort of infect the lining of our respiratory tract, and it's been shown to also impact the GI tract as well. So theoretically, it could affect the stomacite, but still, the number one way that we seem to be transmitting it is airborne through respiratory source.
Dr. Mundi, this question would be directed toward you or Lisa also. Someone was asking, why is 22 French unavailable? I misunderstood the question to think that they meant from manufacturers, but perhaps it was in regard to your research that you were talking about.
I think because we only had so much time and resources to test the different French sizes, we just kind of chose what we felt like were a good representation of small to large, and we went from 20 to 24, and we skipped 22 really just in the interest of time. But many manufacturers do have a 22 French tube. We just didn't test it.
Thank you. I'm going to skip to a question for Cynthia. Cynthia, Rhonda's asking if the volume impacts granulation tissue.
So I think that question probably refers to the volume of the balloon. And the answer is yes. So if a balloon is underinflated or even overinflated, and the size of that button, the fit of that button is not very good, then you're going to see movement in that tube. So for instance, if a balloon is underinflated like this, the button may be, have too much play and movement when it's in place. And sometimes it can be too tight if it's overinflated and it's not sized properly. So the answer to that question is yes. So if a balloon is not inflated properly, it's not the balloon per se that's causing the problem. It's the impact on the way the button fits and the way the button moves around inside that stoma. That's the issue. So yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Lisa, we have two people asking about the adapters and pill crushers that you mentioned during your talk that help with medication administration with the NFIT connectors. They're wondering if you can be more specific about the products.
Sure. So at first we thought like, maybe this medication administration, we're going to be able to just use, just a 60 cc flushing syringe. And we quickly realized that we needed to ask our pharmacy to bring in a medication cap for liquid medications. So we did bring in the Medelia medication cap. And so when a medication is ordered for home for someone who has a NFIT tube, instead of putting that standard slip tip cap in the bottle, they're putting the NFIT Medelia medication cap. And then along those same lines, we have our pharmacy stocking the lower dose medication syringe, NFIT syringes as well, because we know that, a lot of the home medical equipment companies aren't able to provide those types of supplies. And so we have asked our pharmacy to do that, and they've done that. I recognize that if you went to another pharmacy, they may not have that, but it's definitely something to start asking, because I think they're just a little bit delayed, but we'll realize, they need those things as well. What was the other part of the question?
If you could be specific about the pill crusher.
Yes. Okay. So before we transitioned to ENFit, we were using the Silent Night pill crusher, and some of our patients do have that at home as well. But when we were kind of, after we transitioned a year ago, we realized when it comes to hazardous medication, we really need to have a better hands-off type of approach. And so for two reasons, we changed to a different pill crusher, both for a hands-off approach to medication and to help with like very, very fine crushing. And so we changed to a pill crusher called RX Crush is the name of it. And we've had really, really good feedback, especially with people who are doing like chemotherapy pills at home and things like that. So those are the two brands that we have had, but we're using the RX Crush right now.
Thanks, Lisa. That's very helpful. We do have a longer question. I don't know if Dr. Mundi is still on the line.
Yep, still here.
Okay, so this one is, I'm gonna get you and Lisa while you're still here. This one is about ENFit. It's a long question. Let's see. Someone's asking about the continued availability of legacy extension tubes. That's the short one. And I don't know if you could address that. Do you know the availability? I know it's really more of a manufacturer question, but perhaps you're familiar with it.
Yeah, when we have asked Avanos and AMT, like, will there be a point in time that we aren't able to get legacy extension tubings? So far excuse me. So far, the response has been we don't have any plan to discontinue those at this time. So that's really all we have heard. I don't know, Dr. Mundi, if you know more.
No, I don't exactly. I mean, I think if there's demand, I imagine, they'll continue to be supported. But there is a time point where everyone has made the transition. And at that point, I imagine they would get discontinued.
Okay, I'm going to read part of this because it's long. This is about the safety issues with ENFit. The bottom line is this, the summary: tube feeders feed in a variety of ways and one side doesn't fit all and do the job. Tube feeders are already challenged and they want a connector that is safe, efficient, user-friendly. And they feel that legacy connectors fit that description more readily. They're talking about negative issues with ENFit. It's kind of a philosophical question, but who is going to advocate for the tube feeders who are negatively affected by ENFit? I don't know if you want to address the feedback you've heard, or I think that Dr. Mundi kind of addressed this in his talk about how manufacturers have been responsive, but any thoughts or considerations to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I could start, and then I'd love to hear from Lisa as well. I think when we first heard about this transition to ENFit, and the misconnections were quite real, even for our hospital system. I mean, we had many, events that were called, showing that misconnections do occur. So when we first heard about this, I think Lisa, there were a few other dietitians, the physicians that were involved, and the nurses. We looked at our entire practice, including the home enteral nutrition practice, and went through what are the most common ways that individuals, provide enteral feeding. And then we set forth, with the help of Oley, the FDA, to test those scenarios. And that testing, I mean, it was hours and hours of work to do that. But once we did the testing, especially some of the data that I've shown you, you can kind of see from that data, we found that, this ENFit versus legacy comparison didn't yield any sort of results, in the sense that we didn't see a downstream effect or a poor outcome with the NFIT, especially when you looked at, blenderized tube feeding, the force required to provide that. So I think we sat back and we looked at all of the testing we had done. We looked at the changes in terms of the tubes that the manufacturers had made to accommodate blenderized tube feeding. And then we looked at the risks of not making this transition, of staying the course, in terms of the misconnections that continued to happen. So at that point, we felt that for Mayo Clinic and our patients, it was the best thing to go ahead and transition. I think each individual has to make that determination themselves. But with the data available, we felt it was in the best interest of our patients to make that transition, and we've done it. We've had the transition now for more than a year, and it's gone quite smoothly, as Lisa was saying. So I think all in all, we would make the transition again. Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, the only thing I just wanted to mention is, we see all of our patients at least once a year. So that would be like 2,000 kind of follow-up visits. And I do feel like when the question asks who would advocate for you, I do feel like it's your healthcare provider, because like one patient came in and they're like, I was always using nuts in my blend and I can't get that, I need help. It's not working well with NFIT. And then we kind of say, okay, well, show me the blend. Well, how are you doing that? And we realized, though not ideal, maybe from a time span standpoint, that she just needed to blend for 1 minute longer than she was blending before. That took care of the problem, and she continued to do exactly what she was doing before. So I do think some of these individual things where people feel like their needs are not being met, I think a healthcare provider, part of your nutrition team, part of your home medical equipment team might be able to help walk you through, if you gave specifics of, this is what I want to do, and this is a barrier to me, rather than just kind of a more blanket statement that says this isn't working for me. That's harder to accommodate, solutions.
And I would just add on to that we do that all day, every day anyway, regardless of what we troubleshoot all day long some of these things. So that wouldn't be unusual, whether it's your home care provider, your community dietitian, the Oley Foundation, many support groups, these types of things, get bubbled up to clinicians that work in this space, and we solve the problem, figure out a menu of options.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, it's legitimate to go to some of the manufacturers that are in the expo and ask a question about legacy and discontinuing. They may or may not be able to answer. Mm-hmm. I know that, with the pandemic, things maybe are a little different than people may have anticipated, and maybe some questions are harder to answer, but they might have a sense of how long things may be available or not available.
And we've been doing this for several years now. We've been providing NFIT supplies for over 3 years now. And, there are people who have walked the path before you. And, so we've learned some things along the way. And so if you transition and have an experience that doesn't seem to be optimal for you, there's probably some answers out there from some folks that have blazed the trail. So I would just encourage you to dive in and give it a try. I mean, now's the time, right? Because you have both options available right now. So now would be the time to test drive NFIT if you're, leery of it.
Do you feel there are safety issues with NFIT that are not being addressed?
Not from our perspective. We haven't had any issues pop up in our home care population that's using NFIT. It's a population I'm tracking. It's growing by 500%. From 3-4 years ago, we have almost 500% more users of NFIT than we did back then. So we haven't had things bubble up to us. We usually hear about things when things aren't going well, and we just haven't heard issues. And I'm curious to see what I'm very intrigued by Katherine's experience because you're dealing with a lot of Blenderized users as well as Lisa. And I mean, you guys are the experts. You guys are dealing specifically with a population that does that. So, I'd like to open it up, to Katherine and see what she has to say.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. I haven't had, at least with the transition in my patient population, and maybe they're being quiet, but a lot of them are really vocal, especially moving to blends. I haven't had the problems I think that I was fearing or being concerned about. So I feel like it's been fairly smooth with us in our pediatric population. I think, there's always your one-offs, like Lisa was suggesting, where, it's more of an individual basis where you're assessing, what they're using to blend their blends and what ingredients you're using, and kind of troubleshooting from that perspective. But, we do have that conversation when we meet to talk about Blenderized diets, and that it's going to be thicker than your formula, many times there's potential to be. And so having families prepared for that, I think, helps too. But I haven't necessarily seen the huge amount of issues that maybe we thought, or just people were nervous about with the change.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, did you have any other? I'm sorry, Katherine. Thank you, Katherine. I'm trying to look at questions surreptitiously on the side. Did you have anything to add, Lisa?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. I do have a comment from one of our staff that suggests that you do talk to AMT and Avanos in their booths in the expo hall about the availability of legacy tubes, which I think we talked about. I have a nurse practitioner for AMT who says we will continue to manufacture legacy products. Dr. Mundi and Lisa, this one's for you. And I guess with Oley too, I think that we've partnered in with you on this survey, developing the survey. It says the upcoming survey mentioned by Dr. Mundi, does it focus exclusively on ENFIT transitioning?
No, it's a general enteral nutrition survey. We really want to know, what the practice of home enteral nutrition is out there. And so it includes legacy products. It just asks questions about how you're feeding, what the feeds are, what tubes you're using. There's few questions about how the coronavirus is affecting, your enteral feeding. So it's a general home enteral nutrition survey. And I think it'll give us a great sense of how many have transitioned to ENFIT, how many are planning, and if they're having issues. So it'd be great if, everyone could fill it out, and we hope to post it on the Oley website soon.
That sounds great. We look forward to helping you get that out.
Yeah.
Cynthia, this one's for you. Someone's asking specifically, what are the yellow ties called to secure bolsters? To secure bolster.
Yeah, so there is a manufacturer that makes a tube that that clamp comes on automatically. It's a cook tube where it's a GI cook tube. But I haven't seen any other tubes where it comes from the manufacturer of the tube. So I've seen some folks use like a nylon cable clamp, which is actually something you can find online. They're actually electrical devices, to clamp together, I think, electrical wires or something. I don't know, Dr. Mundi maybe know more about this than I do.
Maybe we could get you to do this one for a tube talk tip.
Yeah, I mean,
in the newsletter.
It's something that I have learn from consumers, who troubleshoot their own. I will tell you that our home tube feeding population, you guys are a resourceful group. You figure things out. And so we learn from you some of the solutions, but this is one that's just kind of, out there in the marketplace for a different use. And you just want to make sure that it fits properly and it's not actually clamping your tube closed. So because it's not designed for a tube, you'd want to make sure. But if you do a search online for that nylon twist, lock clamp, like those types of words, we'll find that answer for you.
Thanks, Cynthia. Katherine, this one's for you, and maybe Lisa Epp too. It's about pumping Blenderized tube feeding. I'm not sure so if you're pumping at Blenderized tube feed and put it on an ice pack, will it keep longer than 2 hours?
That's a really good question. I am curious, and I don't know, Lisa, if you guys have done any studies on how long ice packs of what type keep things cold. But I know my families do that, and I've been looking for resources, even thinking about some way to test it, thinking about kids' lunches that are packed in kind of a similar way. But I don't have a good answer to that question. I know that I know that people do it. I don't know if I have a good answer.
I feel the same way. We have kind of remained with the stance of 2 hours is it, because we don't have any data to tell us that ice packs, can extend it by XYZ amount of time. And that would also be a very difficult thing to study because you have such a variety of ice packs and containers and temperatures and things like that. There'd be so many variables. So from a conservative standpoint, we've had to kind of say the same thing. 2 hours is it, though I know people use ice packs.
Yeah, and I think also the variable to add is how the food was also prepared and stored. I know Troy has done a great deal of work on microbial contamination and things like that. And so if you start off with a higher bacterial count, in 2 hours, it's going to be worse. So really also depends on how you prepare the Blenderized tube feeding.
Right. Like you said, how contaminated it might be at the start is just another one of those variables, which would make it so hard to study how much longer can you push it than the 2 hour time frame.
Thank you for considering that one. I think I have one more question. My son has oropharyngeal dysphagia and is on a G-tube because of this. He does pleasure feedings and is only on purees. If he doesn't eat all that pleasure food, can I give him a Blenderized tube feed diet? Does that make sense? The way I read it.
Yeah. I mean, my short answer would
what
be
he
yes.
doesn't finish. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually what our current practice is for both kids and adults who orally feed. You make the meal that you would expect, that child to eat, and whatever after 20 minutes is the time frame that we give, just so they don't get too tired out, isn't consumed, is then blended and put through the tube.
We do the same thing. Absolutely.
I'll do one more question and then I think we'll wrap it up so everyone has time to get to the breakout sessions. And Lisa, if you want to go to, so you can get into that room. Yep.
Okay.
And be ready for your next session. Thank you so much for your help and wonderful presentation.
Bye.
Bye, Lisa.
Bye. So Lisa will be in a breakout session at 3:15 if anybody wants to join her breakout session. So this question I think probably goes to you, Cynthia, but everyone may have some input. Do you know of any studies that discuss the importance or benefits of having a properly fit tube or the adverse effects of having a tube that does not fit properly?
I don't know of any studies specifically around poorly fitting tubes. I think it's mentioned in some research around some tube site complications, like when you've got buried bumper syndrome or different things of that nature if a tube's placed too tight. But I don't know of a singular study that looks at just that specific issue. And I'd like to see if Dr. Mundi or Katherine know of any studies or if they, look at that sort of data, if you know anything different, but I haven't come across it.
Yeah, same. I think you really said it quite well, especially when you demonstrated the poorly fitting balloon causing granulation tissue. So if the tube is too tight, just like you're saying, you could get buried bumper or even erosions at the bottom end. If there's too loose and too much movement, granulation tissue. You can also get breakdown if it's too tight at the external skin disc, leading to infections or other issues. So it's very important to make sure that it's fitting well.
You know, in the absence of published literature on the subject, what there is experiential data, you know, and that's sort of what I referred to. And I would say that every clinician on this call, Lisa included, I would probably feel confident speaking for her, is that with those issues, a poorly fitting tube, whether it's a button or a dangler style tube, is going to lead to issues. I mean, we know that from experience. I just don't know of any published literature on it.
Well, thank you all. I will conclude with one comment that came in at the end. Avanos has also responded to the question about legacy versus ENFIT, and if they have a date to cease production of legacy. Their response was, we will continue to monitor the market, but at this time we plan to provide both legacy and ENFIT tubes. So I still encourage you to visit them in the expo though. And to do the scavenger hunt. It's actually pretty fun. So thank you everybody for joining us. Katherine and Dr. Mundi and Lisa and Cynthia. I think this was a fabulous session. I'm excited to have been part of it and really appreciate your dedication to this population and your willingness to be part of this.
Willingness to pull to the side of the road and dial in. Thank you.
Probably on
everybody.
vacation. Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting us to present and participate in this forum. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much as well. I've learned, as I always do from Oley, I learned so much from you guys as consumers and the Oley Foundation, and then you other presenters as well. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So
bye everybody.
Bye. See you in breakout sessions.
Okay, see you there.
Bye.